Hello again, Setch here, and I'm back for episode 4 in my humble little YouTube series. I've started recording in-game footage with NVIDIA Shadowplay, which is awesome and I absolutely endorse it. It records in real time to a good compression format, MP4, and with no obvious loss in frame rate. It even allows you to save the previous 20 minutes of footage retroactively, so you don't have to plan your recording in advance, you can record after something really cool has just happened. It's all very convenient, and in the future I'll be recording in-game footage routinely and not have to rely on these replays. But first I have one more replay that I really want to share. It's an old replay from many months ago, and it's in the old format, and the flying itself includes some amateur moves that I'm not proud of. But I want to share it for two reasons. First of all, it is a dramatic underdog story, and that alone made it seem really special to me. And second, even though it may look on the surface like I'm fumbling around in a blind rage, the truth is, this match forced me to make some hard decisions under pressure, and I thought it could be interesting to talk about the thought process behind each of those decisions. What you're looking at now is a condensed summary of footage from the match. The interesting part doesn't happen until the end, but I'll leave this playing in the background while I set the stage. People who fly with me know that I am a cautious flyer by nature. I can be aggressive with my positioning, and I'm happy to draw attention from a distance and use it to drag opponents into a trap, but I prefer to avoid immediate risks. I'd rather stay out of reach than dodge bullets, and I avoid going head-on unless all the other more conservative options have been exhausted. But in this match, I find myself in exactly that situation, repeatedly. Time and again, I formulate a plan, but the situation changes, and I'm forced into a high-risk situation because the remaining alternatives are simply worse. And several times in the match, I wind up going head-on. I want to make it clear that this video is not intended as a demonstration of how to do well in head-on passes. I'm bad at head-on engagement. There's absolutely not any demonstration of skill there. But what the video does show, I think, is an interesting series of situations where survival depends entirely on keeping the initiative, and a high-risk gamble turns out to be a reasonable defensive play because it's the only way to keep that initiative. In other words, it's a catalog of illustrations of how a good defense isn't just about avoiding every risk, but rather it's about assessing the situation honestly and confronting the risks that you face rationally. So, up until this point, we've seen a pretty routine match. I'm in the P400 today and flying it in my conventional style as an energy fighter. The P400 is a solid all-around aircraft, and it can turn pretty decently too. But my background is in flying the Lightning, and when I fly the P400 I think of it as a low-calorie version of the Lightning, with similar armament and better maneuverability. It sacrifices performance at altitude, but the speed is still good and adequate for energy fighting at low and medium altitudes. At least that's how I fly the plane, and usually the results are pretty predictable. But things got interesting towards the end of the match. Ticket counters don't display accurately in War Thunder replays, but the situation at this point was not far from what the UI shows. It was a close game, and by this point, Blue Team is down to our last few tickets. Red Team has a PBY at altitude, and I'm trying to knock it down. But while I'm climbing, I've also attracted the attention of a little F2A Buffalo, which in turn is trying to intercept me from below. This is an old replay, and in this version of the game, the Buffalo is pretty poorly armed, mostly with 30 caliber rifles, so I'm not treating it as a very serious threat. My P400 is faster than the Buffalo, as well as a better climber, albeit by a narrow margin, so I figure I can afford to focus on the PBY first and deal with the Buffalo later. I thought I could get to the PBY without giving up control over the Buffalo, and if I'd been correct in that assessment, my plan might have been good. But as it turns out, I've underestimated the threat posed by the Buffalo and the tenacity of its pilot, and that one mistake will cascade into a whole series of difficult consequences. Eventually I do knock the PBY down, But in the process, the buffalo gets closer than I expected and opens fire. I'm forced into a crude, sloshing dive as I try to evade the buffalo's attack. The buffalo has no trouble sticking to me in the dive, and by this point, yeah, I'm beginning to realize I need to take this situation seriously. I'm picking up speed in the dive, but the buffalo is right on me. At this point, the red pilot has an excellent positional advantage. But then his buffalo goes into an ill-advised half-roll, probably initiated by the AI instructor. This essentially does my defensive job for me, and creates a perfect opportunity to disengage with a brake turn. I only turn about 90 degrees here, but the buffalo isn't oriented properly to follow my turn because our lift vectors are in opposite directions. He has to go the long way around and traverse about 270 degrees, mostly in the horizontal. This costs him distance and, more importantly, speed. It may not have been the cleanest execution, but in this case it was good enough. From an initial separation of only about 150 meters, the brake turn brought me out to 350. That's still dangerously close range, but with my speed advantage secured, I only need to evade for a few seconds before I'm out of reach entirely. At 600 meters and above, few pilots have the marksmanship to compensate for even minimal evasions. And the few that do, well, you'll learn to look out for those. Once I'm out of guns range, my plan is pretty routine. Outrun and outclimb the buffalo and then probably kill it with a stall trap. Or so I think. But in the background, things are going badly for Blue Team. There's only 2 of us left, and my ally, a British faction player, is getting pinned down and farmed at the spawn point. Soon he'll be eliminated and I will be alone. At this point, I notice it's not just the buffalo chasing me. There's a MiG-3 inbound as well. The MiG-3 is at 6 kilometers and closing fast. The buffalo is at maybe 2. My plan was to develop an energy advantage on the buffalo, but at this rate, the MiG will intercept me before I can finish that fight, and if I keep climbing, my eventual engagement at high altitude will only play to the MiG's natural strength. I can't afford to get dragged into a 1v2, but I do have a solid firepower advantage over the buffalo. Like I said, this is one of the earlier drafts armed with lighter guns. So, new plan. Kill the buffalo head-on, juke the head-on with the MiG, and beat that plane in a turn fight. At this point, the MiG is still climbing to meet me, so I'll have an initial energy advantage, which I'm planning to spend on some yo-yos. Unfortunately, I failed to kill the buffalo, and not only that, my engine is now smoked. Incidentally, while most of my own head-on attacks in this replay are admittedly clumsy and desperate, I'd like to acknowledge that the buffalo pilot did a better job here. He made his shot from long range and then dodged my retaliation. He did, however, make a mistake by giving me a shot at his wings in plan form during the merge. But anyway, he survived, and I'm now officially in a 1v2 situation. I'm extending away from the buffalo, the MiG is dead ahead, I can't fight both. New plan. Kill the MiG head-on, then decide what to do about the buffalo. I kill the MiG, but at this point I notice 2 things. 1, I'm definitely the last remaining player on Blue Team, and 2, just behind the MiG there's also a hostile Airacobra climbing to join the fight. The Airacobra is basically an improved, upgraded version of my own plane, with a bigger gun and, in this case, an engine that isn't draining oil. I'll be hard-pressed to beat the Airacobra without a positional advantage, and I sure don't want to fight it 1v2. On the bright side, in the process of going head-on with the MiG, I've extended away from the buffalo, so I have enough space now to turn around and face it again. With the results of our previous encounter notwithstanding, it still remains an objective fact that I outgun the buffalo. New plan. Turn around, kill the buffalo head-on, then hurry over and press my advantage against the Airacobra before it can climb to my altitude. For once, things start to go my way. The buffalo dies in a richly deserved fireball, and I carry my remaining speed into an attack on the Airacobra. It seems like a good angle. Unfortunately, the P400 has an extremely limited magazine of ammunition, and mine runs out just as I make my attack. Possibly my aim fails too. One way or another, my attack fails to secure a kill. But with a bit of energy conservative looping, I managed to assert positional control and scare the Aarakocra away. So, the emergency is over, and for once I have a moment to take stock and consider my situation. Red Team is winning, but at this point I no longer have any control over the outcome of the ground objectives. If Red Team is still bombing, they'll win any moment. If not, the outcome will be determined by the simulated combat on the ground, with much the same result. The mission will end any moment with a Red Team victory. Either way, Red Team already has this mission in the bag. But for my own dignity, I'd like to bring my plane home in one piece. Unfortunately, my engine feels like it's getting weaker every second, and landing to repair is not an option. It's safe to assume that every remaining fighter on Red Team is currently inbound to challenge me, and I can't stay safe at altitude. New plan. Make aggressive use of my remaining horsepower and altitude while it lasts. Race into controlling positions above the hostile reinforcements, intercepting them one by one before they have a chance to climb. Press them to fight at a disadvantage as long as I can, and keep fighting until they run out of planes, I run out of energy, or I'm saved by defeat on the ground when the last blue pillbox dies. Necessarily, the plan relies heavily on leveraging my only real remaining asset, my altitude advantage. And of course, the very next adversary I meet is an A6 M2 Ryson, the notorious energy vampire. To make matters worse, it's flown with some degree of competence. On the opening pass, the red pilot suckers me to bleed some energy on a failed deflection shot. He then goes into a deep, low yo-yo, which I seek to punish by extending my arc overhead. At this point, what I want to do is dive on the Zero from a high angle after coming around in a flat turn, or preferably even an ascending turn. But instead, I wind up in a descending turn. In retrospect, I don't know if the diminished power of the engine just wasn't up to this maneuver and I had to trade altitude for turn rate, or if it was a simple case of misjudgment. In any case, I bleed altitude and fail to get the guns around in time. The Zero, being a specialist in low-speed vertical maneuvers, has no trouble holding on to the climb and gets in a shot of his own for good measure. Luckily, the bulk of his attack passes harmlessly through my beleaguered Cobra, which is mostly made of holes anyway at this point. The one thing the Cobra ordinarily has over the Ryson is speed, but in this situation with my failing engine, the tables are turned. The Ryson will run me down, and once it gets into range, the Cobra will have no defense at all. But I still have one card left. At the moment, the Ryson is still slow from its climb, and I'm still carrying speed from my dive. New plan. I can use that speed to extend away, turn around at a distance, and hope that the Ryson will be foolish enough to accept the invitation to fight me in the only type of fight he's still capable of losing. Head on. And to my immense relief, that's exactly how it plays out. The Ryson goes down in flames. But no sooner does it clear my gun sights than I'm faced with yet another Buffalo square ahead. Once again, I'm confronted with an opponent that cannot possibly fail to kill me unless I kill him first, head on. I shoot, I land hits, again my cannon runs dry, again I have just enough speed to extend away while the Buffalo, slow from climbing, wallows to come around. But with my plane in this condition, I'm not fast myself, and I can't afford to run far. At the first opportunity, I duck into a shallow yo-yo, trading some of my remaining altitude for speed to help bring the guns around. We trade blows head on, and the Buffalo too is down in flame. My situation in this match has degenerated, repeatedly, into desperate frontal attacks, sometimes due to my own immediate errors of judgment. And I've survived those attacks almost entirely by luck, because this is not the type of fighting I'm good at. But in spite of all the risks I've taken, I'm still not being deliberately reckless. I've not given up, and I'm still doing the best I can to bring my plane home in one piece. The fight is still on, and I'm still sticking to my plan, which is to fight aggressively with every remaining meter of altitude. So I keep exercising energy discipline as best I'm able, and when the next Ryson shows up to climb at me, this time the fight turns out the way it's damn well supposed to. Just like it does again for the Spitfire behind him. And the Spitfire behind him? Well, the world may never know. because one of us at this point got saved by the bell. I'm probably biased, but I'd like to think it was the spit. In spite of my mistakes, I was proud of my performance in this match. Unlike the vast majority of players in War Thunder, head-on attacks don't come naturally to me. In each of the highlighted encounters, my natural reflex was to extend away and gain separation, but in each case, I suppressed that reflex and instead confronted what I judged to be a necessary risk, based on my best rational assessment of the situation. I think that's probably good advice in general. Flying always involves an element of instinct, but it also requires making a plan and adapting to the situation as it develops. When the situation demands it, don't hesitate, act decisively, even if that requires operating outside of your comfort zone. Even when things look bleak, don't give up. You can't win unless you try. Setch out.